When I was in high school, I discovered the wonderful world of Cole's Notes. Now, I don't know if they're still in use today, but Cole's Notes were essentially executive summaries for students. Cole's Notes gave you just the highlights of a famous piece of literature. Now, when I was in school, teachers hated them, but students loved them. Now, if you think about it, when you share with someone the story of how you became a follower of Jesus, you are essentially giving them the Cole's Notes version of your life. I mean, you don't tell them every event that happened to you. You focus upon the defining moments from your life, the moments that shaped you, the moments that changed you, the moments that made you the person that you are today. Well, today, I'm going to do my best to give you a Cole's Notes version of the Broadway Church story. And to be even more specific, I'm going to give you a Cole's Notes version of just the last, we'll say 30 years of the Broadway Church story. Now, why just the last 30 years, you ask? Well, Broadway Church is 114 years old, so our history runs deep and the stories are plentiful. There's no way I could do it justice in the 25 minutes or so that I have. At our 100th anniversary, a video was produced describing our first 100 years. You can access it on our website, and it'll give you a solid sense of the roots of this congregation. Now, what I'm seeking to do today is to pick up the Broadway story where the anniversary video left off. And I'm going to do that by sharing some stories with you, some defining moments that have served to shape Broadway Church's current philosophy and style of ministry. I mean, have you ever wondered why we do things the way that we do them here at Broadway Church? Have you ever wondered how we got to where we are as a congregation? Well, I'm about to take you on a behind-the-scenes journey, and it's my hope that at the end of this journey, you're going to have a deeper level of understanding and a higher level of inspiration regarding who we are and what we're seeking to do as a body of believers in Jesus. Now, when I talk with those who have deep roots in Broadway Church, they all tend to see history the same way. They all treat the ministries of Pastor Watts and Pastor Hornby as a defining season. In the 1970s, Pastor Watts was the lead pastor at Broadway Church. Pastor Watts was a godly and wise man. He sensed that his season of leadership was coming to an end, and he had the foresight to create a succession plan. So Pastor Watts brought in a young man by the name of Alan Hornby to be his associate and to eventually become the lead pastor of Broadway. During Pastor Hornby's time, Broadway Church was meeting across the street from this Vancouver campus. Now, the former building was considerably smaller than our present one, but the former building was packed out in multiple services, and lives were being changed. The Broadway Manor and the Broadway Lodge were initiated under the ministry of Pastor Hornby. A city church reaching city lives was the theme under his leadership. And it was more than a slogan, it was a mission that was being accomplished. And then something tragic happened. While still in his prime, Pastor Hornby passed away after a courageous battle with cancer. The people of Broadway Church were devastated, and they mourned the loss of that great man. But they had to keep going. They were just starting a multi-million-dollar building project at that time. What we now refer to our Vancouver campus, was about to be built, and it was a huge undertaking. Now, at the risk of oversimplifying things, let me put it this way. The years immediately following the death of Pastor Hornby and the building of this new facility were difficult years for Broadway Church. The city was changing, the culture was changing, and Broadway Church was striving to regain its footing. Now, several godly leaders served during those difficult years, seeking to pastor a congregation that was grieving a loss and trying to find its way. Now, as a testament to the faithfulness of God, as well as the strength of Broadway's DNA and core members, Broadway kept pushing forward in the midst of the struggle. Even during those difficult days, ministries like Shiloh Housing, the Redwoods, and the City Reach Care Society were either birthed or brought under the Broadway umbrella. Even under trial, Broadway remained a city church reaching city lives. But it can't be denied. times were tough. And by the year 2008, Broadway Church was at a crossroads. Now, the statistics are a matter of historical record. The attendance had significantly decreased. Broadway Church was one campus with one service on a Sunday morning. The median age was trending older, as young families and young adults were moving on and moving out. On many Sundays in 2008, the nursery at Broadway Church was literally empty. In the year 2008, that was Broadway Church's reality. Now, let's pause the Broadway Church story right there. We're going to come back to it in a moment. In 1981, I became a follower of Jesus. At a moment of crisis in my life, I randomly opened a Bible, actually this very Bible, to Jeremiah chapter 1. It was the call of Jeremiah, a young man, and I read these words for the first time. Don't say that I'm young. You must go to everyone that I send you to and say whatever I command you. Today, I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and to tear down, to destroy, to overthrow, to build and to plant. Now, the words that I read off of that page exploded in my soul on that day. It was as if God himself was speaking directly to me. And looking back, that's exactly what God was doing. I immediately changed my career path from heading to law school to heading to Bible school to train for pastoral ministry. Now, years later, after graduating, God sovereignly began placing me in congregations that were in conflict, congregations that needed someone to uproot, tear down, to destroy, overthrow, to build, and to plant. And each congregation I served in those early years seemed to prepare me for the next one. In the very first congregation that I served as a lead pastor, a random phone call one day altered the direction of my ministry. I was sitting in my office one day when the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was a woman named Cora. She said, "Pastor Darin, you don't know me. My husband and I recently became followers of Jesus at your congregation, and we've been attending for the last few weeks, and we're soon going to be baptized." I said, "Cora, yes, I heard about you and your husband, Al. I look forward to meeting you someday." She said, "Yeah, that would be great." She said, "Pastor Darin, I have a dumb question." I said, "Cora, there's no such thing as a dumb question. What's your question?" She says, "Al and I, my husband and I," she said, "we've been going to church there for the last few weeks. And, well, we're singing a song. And here's my question." She said, "Who's the lamb?" I said, "I beg your pardon?" She said, "We sing all the time, 'Worthy is the Lamb.' Who's the lamb?" I'll never forget that moment. I swiveled around in my chair in my office, and I looked out the window to the parking lot, and it occurred to me, I have been preaching to the choir. I have been preaching to people as though they understand the Bible, as they know all the stories, as though they know better. They're just not doing what they know. And it occurred to me that there are a whole bunch of people out there who are biblically illiterate, who have no idea what I'm talking about. And I can't speak to them as though they do know what I'm talking about. I need to have a different starting place when it comes to ministry. Looking back, that phone call not only changed the direction of my ministry, but it would eventually change the direction of Broadway Church as well. Because decades later, in the sovereign plan of God, I found myself standing on the platform here at Broadway Church on a Sunday morning in 2008 as their newly elected lead pastor. And on that Sunday morning in 2008, I found myself showing the congregation this picture. It's a picture of the remains of a bridge after a hurricane located somewhere in Honduras. And on that Sunday morning in 2008, I informed the congregation that that picture was their reality. So this is a picture of the Choluteca Bridge, a bridge that faithfully transported the people of Honduras over the Choluteca River. But then, in 1998, Hurricane Mitch came rushing through the region, and this picture reveals what was left behind. The bridge was still intact. There was nothing wrong with the bridge. That bridge had taken people across that river for many, many years. The problem was the river had moved. And on that Sunday morning in 2008, I told the people of Broadway Church that this picture reflected our reality as a congregation. I said, look at that bridge. Look at that river. I said, that bridge was a solid bridge. It was a good bridge. There's nothing wrong with that bridge. It took my father and his father before him and his father before him across that river. That was a solid, excellent, trustworthy bridge. There's only one problem. The river moved. And then I applied this picture to our situation back in 2008. I said, ladies and gentlemen of Broadway Church, that bridge is how we have done church for decades, maybe even centuries. That bridge represents how we've been communicating the good news of Jesus, how we have been doing church for many, many years. There's nothing wrong with that bridge. There's nothing wrong with how we did it for many years, for many decades. That bridge, this church style was good enough for my father and his father before him and his father before him. There's only one problem with the bridge. The river moved. And the river, I explained to them, is our culture. The culture in our nation, in our city of Vancouver, has radically shifted. It has radically changed. We need to build a new bridge. Well, a few weeks later, I addressed a meeting of seniors at Broadway Church. And I did my best to further lay out for them what I felt we needed to do. Well, specifically what they needed to do if Broadway Church was to move forward. Now, before I was asked to speak, a wonderful meal was served. And I'll never forget that day. Those seniors were so kind and so gracious to me, their new pastor, as I wandered from table to table during that meal, introducing myself. I remember thinking they have no idea what I'm about to present to them. They thought they were gathering for a nice little luncheon to hear a nice little devotional from the pastor. I mean, those dear seniors had no idea that I was about to challenge everything they could expect from Broadway Church from that moment forward. Well, after the meal, I began my talk describing the generational landscape, the sociological reality of our nation. I first described the generation that has come to be known as the builder generation. This is the greatest generation, if you will. This is the generation that went through the World War II and through the Great Depression. An incredible generation, a solid generation. As I said, they're often called the greatest generation, and I wouldn't argue with that. With the stamina, the strength that these people had. And the builder generation were essentially raised in church. I can't remember the stat off the top of my head right now, but roughly 90% of Canadians back then attended church weekly. They weren't all followers of Jesus, but they were all biblically literate. They understood the Bible. They had an understanding of God and Jesus and the Christian ethos, if you will. And Johnny went off to war as part of this builder generation. And he was gone away from home for 3-4 years. And then he returned home. And Martha met him at the train station. They hadn't seen each other in years. They met at the train station. They went home and they played rook. No, we know what they did. They went home and reacquainted themselves with each other. And 9 months later, all across North America, Johnny Jr. and Martha Jr. were born. And that became the next generation, what we refer to as the baby boom generation. This is the generation in Canada born between 1946 and 64 or 66, depending on the sociologist that you quote. Now, this baby boom generation was like no other generation before. This generation was massive in numbers. In fact, they call it the pig and the python because on a graph, it looks like a python that has swallowed a pig. It's just this huge bump in population. That's why they're called the baby boomers. And the baby boomers took over society. They shifted how we do everything. Their sheer vast numbers made them overwhelm a North American society. And every generation seeks to rebel against the generation before them, but because the numbers aren't enough, they can't really make a major wave or a major dent. But that wasn't true of the baby boomers. Their numbers were so massive, when they rebelled, they made a difference. And when they got to the age in church, to the young teens and teenagers, the boomers said, church is boring. It's irrelevant. We need to change how we're doing church. And the generation before them, the builder said, no, we've always done it this way, and you'll grow to like it. And the boomer says, but we don't like it, and we'll leave. And the builder generation said, well, if you want to, you can leave, but you'll be back. For the most part, the boomers did leave church, and they didn't come back. And the baby boomers then had their own children, which have come to be known as Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. Now, Generation X is like no other generation in Western civilization. You need to hear this. And this is all the things that I was explaining to the seniors on that day. I said, Generation X is the first generation in Western civilization that was raised outside of the church. They were raised by their boomer parents who had left the church, and the Gen X were raised completely outside of the church, completely outside of biblical teaching. The Generation X were biblically illiterate. And then they had children. And then we have Generation Y and Z and now Alpha generation. There's all these massive generations afterwards that are completely biblically illiterate. And here's what I said to the seniors that day. I said, listen, you raised your children to come to church and they left. And now your grandchildren aren't coming to church. And maybe your great-grandchildren aren't coming to church. And it breaks your heart. I said, listen, I was born at the end of the baby boom generation, just at the beginning of the Gen X generation. I understand your children. I understand your grandchildren. I speak their language. I want to try to reach them. I said, will you help me? I said, here's the reality, folks of Broadway. I'm going to do things in a way that you might not like. We're going to be singing songs that you might not like at a volume that you might not like. I may be dressing in a way that you're not going to like. I may be wearing jeans as I'm preaching that you may not like that. You prefer a suit and a tie. But listen, I'm trying to reach your children and your grandchildren with the good news of Jesus. I said, will you help me? Please don't fight me. I said, I need your permission. In fact, I said this. I said, there are things that I'm going to do. And at what point are you going to draw the line and say, Pastor Darin, if singing that song at that volume, doing it that way means my kids will be saved, well, then my kids can go to hell. The room got silent. I said, I'm not cursing, I'm being literal. At what point are you going to draw the line and say, if doing that means my kids get saved, I won't do that. My kids can go to hell. I said, surely I'm not willing to do more to reach your children than you are. Surely I don't love your children more than you do. I said, I need your permission. I'm asking for your permission to do things differently so together we can reach your children and your grandchildren. I'll never forget. Many of the seniors came up to me afterwards with tears in their eyes, shook my hand and said, Pastor Darin, you have my permission. Well, that was nearly 16 years ago now. And we haven't looked back as a congregation. Since that day, we've been doing our best to preach the good news of Jesus in a way that can be understood by the people around us. We went on to embed the concept of relevance as a core value at Broadway. We affirm that at Broadway, we strive to understand and creatively speak to our times. This means that we will intentionally engage our world so that we might positively affect our world. Now, we value relevance, but not at the expense of our spirit-filled roots. For we also embedded the concept of dynamic spirituality as a core value at Broadway. We also affirm that at Broadway, we understand that a vibrant relationship with God's Spirit is essential to effective living. So this means that we're going to pursue, teach, equip, and model a Spirit-led life. So at Broadway, we strive day after day, week after week, to effectively communicate the message of Jesus to a biblically illiterate culture by the supernatural power of God. I remember coming face to face with this reality of a Broadway culture that is illiterate biblically a few years ago. I was speaking at a local university doing a presentation on the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And I began my presentation at that university by saying, it's Easter, and I've been invited to come here to this university to share with you the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And then I made my presentation. And then, as I always do, I opened it up for questions and answers afterwards. And I'll never forget the very first individual, often to the left of me, raised his hand at the back of the room. And he said, yes, I have a question. He said, you began your presentation by saying that, it's Easter, so you've been invited to come and speak on the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. He said, what does Jesus have to do with Easter? I remember thinking, is this a joke? Am I being punked? But I thought, no, take every question seriously. So I answered the question. And then afterwards, as there was some food being served, I went over to him. I found him in the crowd and I said, hey, thank you for that question. I said, tell me a bit about yourself. Where are you from? Where are you born? Where are you raised? He said, I'm from Vancouver. I was born and raised in West Van and been here my whole life. A university student, born and raised in Vancouver, asked the question, what does Jesus have to do with Easter? Well, with our mission and core values firmly established, we were moving along just fine, thank you very much, as far as I was concerned, when out of the blue, one of our board members challenged me one day. We're sitting over lunch and he said, Pastor Darin, he says, we need to simplify. We need to get focused here at Broadway. I said, what do you mean simplify? What do you mean get focused? He said, listen, we need to clarify why we do things at Broadway. In fact, we need to have such clarity that we can answer the question, why? Why do you do what you do here? We should be able to answer that with just one word. Whatever that word is, we need to find that one word. I remember saying, Ross, I said, we've got mission statements. We've got our core values. He says, yeah, we're not clear enough. We need to be clearer. Well, I took this to our board, and out of respect that I have, great respect I had for Ross, and our board said, sure, let's go down this road. Let's investigate. Let's see what we can do. And for the next year and a half, we talked about this at our board meetings. We had a board retreat. We set up a committee with 2 or 3 doctors on that committee. I mean, these were high-level thinkers. A neurologist was on the committee, for goodness sake. And we're working on this and studying this, and we finally did come down to that one word. But we had to go outside the English language for the word. The word is agape, which is the ancient Greek word for the purest love imaginable. Why do we do everything we do at Broadway Church? Because of the agape love of God. God so agaped the world that he gave his one and only son. Agape is why we do everything that we do. Because God agaped us, we agape the world around us. Well, that was wonderful. We'd settled on our word. And then I remember going out for lunch with Ross again, saying, Ross, well done. Thank you for leading us in that direction. He said, oh, we're not done, Darin. I said, what are you talking about? He said, no, now you need to equip me, Ross talking. He says, you need to equip me to how to communicate an ancient Greek word to my atheist business partner. You're not done yet. You need to show me now and equip me how to communicate this to a culture that doesn't understand ancient Greek. I thought, oh, okay, well, I've still got more work to do. And so for the next few months, I got churning on this and thinking about this. How can I communicate this agape concept in a way that will be inviting and understandable to the people around us? I found myself back in Ontario, where I was raised, and I was at a bit of a reunion. I hadn't been with these fellow classmates of mine for almost 40 years. And I wasn't a follower of Jesus in high school, but they had heard that since then I'd become a pastor and so on. And so we were walking to a restaurant to have a meal together, me and about 10 other guys. And I was walking along with this one gentleman. His name was John. And he said, Darin, I hear you're a pastor in Vancouver now. I said, yeah, John, that's what I'm doing. He said, so tell me, Darin, what message does your church have for the city of Vancouver? I remember thinking, is this a setup? Is Ross hiding in the bushes somewhere? And so I test drove a statement that I had been working on for months, my agape statement. I said, John, here's the message that we have. The message of Broadway Church to the people of Vancouver is this. We believe that every person was created to experience and express the purest love imaginable. I remember John stopped when we were walking along the sidewalk and he looked at me and he said, that sounds like a message I'd like to hear more about. I remember thinking, yes, I've stumbled upon something here. And that is now our why statement. Why do we do everything we do at Broadway Church? Because we believe that every person was created to experience and express the purest love imaginable. Well, that is how we got from there to here over the last 30 years. Broadway Church is still a city church reaching city lives. Today, we're a congregation of thousands of people with 6 Sunday services meeting in 3 physical locations with an online and television presence that reaches thousands more, with a social media presence that had 1 million views last year. But we do more than just talk about Jesus. We also do our best to be the hands and feet of Jesus as well. The large family of ministries under the Broadway Church umbrella feed, house, and care for thousands of people every week. And why? Why do we do all of this? We're not doing all of this to pump our own tires or to promote the Broadway brand. We do all of this for one reason. Because as the Apostle Paul declared in 2 Corinthians 5:14, Christ's love compels us. His agape love compels us. We do all of this because we believe that every person was created to experience and express the purest love imaginable. So is that your experience? Jesus came to pay your moral debt, to save you from the penalty of your sin, to offer you eternal life, to offer you the experience of his purest love imaginable. In just a moment, I'm going to give you an opportunity to accept this gift and to become a follower of Jesus yourself. Because God loved us, we in turn love him. And our love for him inspires us to be obedient to him. Jesus himself put it this way. He said, "Whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them." Jesus said, "Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will come to them and make our home with them." In other words, if you love God, your life and your actions and your priorities will show it. Jesus demonstrated his love for you. How are you demonstrating your love for him? Are you obeying him? Are you serving him? Are you trusting him? Are you following him? If you are looking for a place to do these things, if you're looking for a congregation whose mission is clear and whose motivation is love, welcome to Broadway Church. I invite you to join us in our journey. I invite you to give of your time, talents, and treasures for the glory of God, to help us to lead the world around us towards Christ-centered living, so that everyone will experience and express the purest love imaginable. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your love for us. We thank you for the sacrifice that you made on our behalf. While we were straying from you and wandering from you, while we had rebelled against you, while we had turned our backs on you, you never turned your back on us. In fact, you ran towards us by taking on human flesh, by offering yourself as a sacrifice to pay our moral debt, to pay the wages of our sin. And you rose from the dead, defeated the power of death, defeated the power of sin, and now offer your victory to be shared with us as a gift. If you're watching today and you've not yet accepted this gift purchased by Jesus on your behalf, right now, I'm going to offer you an opportunity to do that very thing. Just agree with me as I pray this prayer. God, I acknowledge my rebellion. I admit that I've turned my back on you. I have rejected you. I have sinned. I don't want to live this way any longer. So I turn and I face your cross and your throne and your empty tomb, and I welcome your gift into my life. I welcome and invite your presence into my life. Begin to change me and transform me from the inside out. And God, would that transformation begin right now? Would you give me the courage to tell somebody about this decision, even before my head hits the pillow this evening? By the authority of Jesus Christ, I pray this prayer. Amen. Well, if you just prayed that prayer with me, congratulations. You are now a follower of Jesus. The best advice I can give you is to text the number on the screen right now. Now, we're not tricking you. We're not going to spam you. We're not going to put you on a mailing list. We're not even going to phone you. We'll just text you back and offer our services to you in any way that we can. Well, thank you again for joining us at Broadway Church today. I hope that today's message helps you to understand a little clearer why we do what we do and how we got to where we are here at Broadway Church. God bless you. Thanks for being with us today.